What if the simple act of looking at something, of being aware of it, could fundamentally change what it is? This isn't a question from a science fiction novel. It's a serious proposition that has haunted the edges of physics and philosophy for nearly a century, forcing us to reconsider everything we think we know about reality. We live our lives assuming the world is solid, stable, and exists independently of us. The chair is there whether you're sitting on it or not. The moon continues its orbit whether anyone is watching or not. But what if that assumption, as comforting as it is fundamentally wrong? What if consciousness itself is not just a passive receiver of information, but an active participant in the creation of the universe? This is the breathtaking, and some would say unsettling, territory we are about to explore. We are diving headfirst into one of the most profound mysteries of our time, asking a question that challenges the very bedrock of science and our place in the cosmos. Does consciousness collapse the universe? This idea pushes at the limits of our understanding, born from the bizarre and counterintuitive world of quantum mechanics. At the tiniest scales, particles don't behave like tiny billiard balls. They exist in a haze of possibilities, a superposition of all potential states at once. It's only when a measurement is taken, when an observation is made, that this cloud of potential seems to snap into a single, definite reality. For decades, scientists have wrestled with what exactly constitutes a measurement. Is it the sophisticated machinery in a lab, or is it the presence of a conscious mind finally registering the result? The suggestion that it might be the latter is what forms the heart of our inquiry today. It's a concept that blurs the line between the observer and the observed, between the inner world of our minds and the outer fabric of existence, suggesting that we are far more entwined with the universe than we ever imagined. This journey will take us from the thought experiments of brilliant physicists to the cutting edge of modern cosmology, examining the evidence for and against this extraordinary claim. We'll see how this isn't just an abstract debate for academics in ivory towers. It's a question that touches on the nature of existence, free will, and our ultimate purpose. If our consciousness truly plays a role in shaping reality, then each of us is participating in a cosmic dance of creation with every moment of awareness. It's a perspective that can inspire a profound sense of wonder and responsibility. So, join me as we unravel this mystery, peeling back the layers of an idea that could redefine not only our future but our present, exploring whether the universe is a pre-written script or a story we are all actively writing together, simply by being here to witness it. To grasp why this question about consciousness is so radical, we first have to venture into the realm where our everyday logic completely falls apart. Think about a simple coin toss. In our world, the coin is either heads or tails the moment it lands. But in the quantum world, it's as if the coin is still spinning, existing as both heads and tails at the very same time. This state of being in multiple places or states simultaneously is called superposition, and it's the default mode of existence for the tiny particles that make up our universe. An electron, for instance, isn't neatly orbiting an atom like a planet around a star. Instead, it occupies a probability cloud, a sort of fuzzy sphere where it could be anywhere within that space until the moment someone or something checks its position. It's not that we don't know where it is, it's that the particle itself hasn't settled on a single location yet. This leads us to one of the most famous and famously strange demonstrations in all of science, the double-slit experiment. Imagine a barrier with two thin, parallel slits cut into it. You're firing tiny particles like electrons one by one at this barrier. On the other side is a screen that lights up wherever an electron hits. If electrons behaved like the tiny pellets we might expect, they would pass through one slit or the other and create two bright bands on the screen directly behind the slits. But that's not what happens. Instead, the electrons create a pattern of many alternating light and dark bands, an interference pattern. This is the exact kind of pattern you get when waves, like ripples of water or waves of light, pass through two openings. The peaks and troughs of the waves interfere with each other, creating areas of high intensity and areas of cancellation. So are electrons particles or waves? The baffling answer from quantum mechanics is that they are both, a concept known as wave-particle duality. Each individual electron seems to be acting as a wave of possibilities, passing through both slits at once and interfering with itself to create the pattern. But here's the real twist that makes this relevant to our conscious observer. When scientists placed a detector at the slits to see which one each electron actually went through, the behavior changed instantly. The moment you try to observe the path, the interference pattern vanishes. The electrons stop behaving like spread-out waves and start behaving like discrete particles, neatly going through one slit or the other and creating just two bands on the screen. It's as if the electron knows it's being watched and decides to act differently. The simple act of looking, of gathering information, seems to force the electron to collapse from a spread-out wave of potential into a single, definite particle. This is the quantum measurement problem in a nutshell, and it's this profound weirdness that sets the stage for the even more provocative idea that consciousness itself might be the trigger for this collapse. And this is precisely where the double-slit experiment moves from being merely strange to utterly mind-bending. Let's build on that basic setup to really appreciate the full implication. We have our barrier with two slits and we're sending electrons through one at a time. Even when there's a significant gap between each electron firing, so they can't possibly be interfering with one another, the interference pattern still slowly builds up on the detection screen over time. This is the crucial part. Each individual electron, all on its own, must be interfering with itself. It's as if the single electron doesn't take a single path to the screen. Instead, it takes all possible paths simultaneously, passing through both slits like a wave, and the version of itself that went through the left slit interacts with the version that went through the right slit. This wave of potential encompasses all the possibilities for where the electron could end up, and it's this wave that creates the pattern. The true shock comes when we try to catch the electron in the act. The moment we install a sophisticated detector to observe which slit each electron actually passes through, the entire scenario transforms. The beautiful, complex interference pattern immediately disappears. In its place, we get two simple, solid bands on the screen, one behind each slit. The electrons stop behaving like ethereal waves and start behaving like well-behaved, localized particles. They choose a single slit. It's not that our detector is physically bumping the electrons and changing their path. The very act of obtaining which path information, of gaining knowledge about the system, causes the wave function, that cloud of possibilities, to collapse. The electron is forced to pick a single, concrete reality from its menu of options. This effect is so robust that it works even if you try to be clever. Scientists have set up delayed choice experiments where the decision to measure or not to measure is made after the electron has already passed through the slits. Astonishingly, the result seems to retroactively determine how the electron behaved back at the slits. It's as if the universe waits until the last possible moment, until a conscious being finally looks at the data to decide what actually happened in the past. This spooky behavior isn't limited to electrons in a lab. It applies to all quantum particles, from photons of light to entire molecules that are large enough to be seen under a microscope. The quantum world operates on this principle of potentiality. Nothing is truly fixed until it is observed. This leaves physicists with a monumental question: what qualifies as an observer? Is it the photographic plate, the silicon chip in the detector? Or does it require something more, Does it require a conscious mind to finally register the outcome, to convert possibility into actuality? The double-slit experiment doesn't provide a final answer, but it sets the stage for this profound debate by demonstrating, beyond any doubt, that the universe at its most fundamental level is deeply affected by how we choose to look at it. The line between the world out there and the mind in here is far blurrier than we ever suspected. This bizarre behavior of particles, this insistence on staying in a haze of possibilities until someone takes a look, presents physics with its most persistent and frustrating puzzle. It's known as the measurement problem, and it's far more than a quirky technicality. It's a gaping hole in our fundamental description of reality. Quantum mechanics, with its mathematical equations, is spectacularly successful at predicting the probabilities of different outcomes. The equations tell us precisely what the odds are for an electron to be here or there. But what the equations do not tell us, and what physicists have been arguing about for nearly 100 years, is what actually happens in that moment of transition. What is the specific trigger that causes the wave function, that mathematical description of all possibilities, to suddenly collapse into a single, concrete fact? Why does the universe switch from a world of could be to a world of is? The core of the headache is this: in the quantum formalism, there are two completely different sets of rules. There's the smooth, continuous, and deterministic evolution of the wave function. This is described by Erwin Schrödinger's equation, and it governs how a quantum system behaves when it's left completely alone. It's a predictable, wave-like unfolding of possibilities. But then there's the second rule, the abrupt, random, and discontinuous collapse. This happens upon measurement, and it's utterly different from the first rule. It's not gradual, it's instantaneous. So we have a beautiful, elegant theory that works perfectly in two separate boxes, but we have no agreed-upon rule for when we switch from one box to the other. Where exactly do we draw the line? When does a system stop being quantum and start being classical? This isn't just an academic debate. It strikes at the heart of what we mean by words like measurement and observation. Is the boundary defined by size? Does a system cease to be quantum when it becomes big enough, like a dust particle or a cat? But experiments keep pushing that boundary, demonstrating quantum effects with larger and larger molecules. Is the boundary defined by complexity or by the involvement of a conscious mind? This ambiguity means that without a solution to the measurement problem, we don't have a complete picture of the world. We have a phenomenally accurate recipe book for making predictions, but we lack the story that explains why the recipe works. It's like having a clock that tells perfect time, but with no understanding of the gears inside the casing. This unresolved problem is what forces physicists to consider interpretations of quantum mechanics that sound more like philosophy than science, because the math alone leaves us with a universe that seems incomplete until someone or something pays attention. Faced with this puzzling behavior, the physics community needed a framework to make sense of it all. And in the late 1920s, a powerful and pragmatic answer emerged from the minds of two giants, Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg. This school of thought, born in the city of Copenhagen, became the orthodox interpretation of quantum mechanics, the one you would find in most textbooks for decades. Its central tenet offers a very specific, and for some, a very unsatisfying, solution to the measurement problem. The Copenhagen interpretation draws a sharp line between the quantum world and the classical world. It posits that a quantum system, like an electron, evolves as a wave function, a smeared-out set of probabilities only until it interacts with a macroscopic classical measuring device. This interaction is what causes the wave function to collapse into a single definite state. Crucially, within this framework, the trigger for collapse is the measurement apparatus itself, the Geiger counter, the photographic film, the screen that lights up, not the conscious mind of the scientist. Bohr argued that it is meaningless to talk about a quantum particle having definite properties like position or momentum before it is measured. The apparatus isn't just revealing a pre-existing reality, it is completing the reality. The act of measurement is an inseparable part of the phenomenon, forcing the fuzzy quantum potential to crystallize into a concrete fact that we can record and discuss in classical terms. This was a profoundly instrumentalist view. The theory isn't about what is, but about what we can say about what we observe. And for practical purposes, it worked spectacularly well, allowing physicists to calculate outcomes and build technologies like lasers and semiconductors without getting bogged down in metaphysical debates. However, this very practicality contains what many see as its greatest weakness, a kind of philosophical cop-out. The Copenhagen interpretation provides a clear before and after picture. Before measurement, wave function; after measurement, definite particle. But it notoriously fails to provide a precise physical definition of what constitutes a measurement. What exactly makes a detector classical and therefore capable of causing collapse is its size, the number of atoms, its complexity. The interpretation treats the measuring device as a mysterious black box that operates by different rules than the quantum system it measures, yet the device itself is ultimately made of quantum particles. This creates an infinite regress. If the measuring apparatus is quantum, then its interaction with the electron should just create a larger, entangled quantum system. So what then causes that larger system to collapse? Would we need another, even bigger apparatus to measure the first apparatus? The Copenhagen interpretation simply stops the chain by fiat, declaring that at some ill-defined point, the quantum weirdness stops and classical certainty begins. For all its success, this approach leaves a fundamental question hanging in the air. If consciousness isn't the culprit, then what special property does a piece of laboratory equipment possess that forces the universe to make up its mind? While the Copenhagen interpretation offered a practical toolkit for physicists, its philosophical loose ends deeply troubled one of the greatest mathematical minds of the 20th century, John von Neumann. He saw the arbitrary line drawn between the quantum system and the classical measuring device as a glaring inconsistency. If everything in the universe is ultimately made of quantum particles obeying quantum laws, von Neumann reasoned, then the measuring apparatus itself must be a quantum object. His groundbreaking analysis, laid out in his 1932 book, The Mathematical Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, took the logic of the theory to its ultimate and startling conclusion. He mathematically demonstrated that there is no physical place to stop the chain of interactions. When an electron in a superposition hits a detector, the two become entangled, their fates linked in a single, larger quantum state. The detector enters a superposition of having recorded electron here and electron there. This entangled system could then interact with the scientist's recording device, which would also become entangled, and so on, all the way up the chain. This relentless progression leads to an inescapable endpoint, the observer's own sensory organs and brain. The photons carrying the image of the experimental result strike the retina, triggering a cascade of neurochemical processes that are, at their core, physical interactions between molecules and atoms. According to von Neumann's strict logic, these biological components should also become part of the ever-expanding entangled quantum system. There is no special magic that makes a hunk of metal and silicon in a detector classical, while the complex organic molecules in a human brain are somehow exempt from quantum rules. This analysis demolishes the convenient stopping point proposed by the Copenhagen view. If everything is quantum all the way up, then nothing made of matter can cause the wave function to collapse. It was from this impeccable logical foundation that von Neumann made his breathtaking leap. He concluded that the only thing that is not part of this physical quantum chain is the intangible faculty of consciousness itself, the abstract act of awareness. He proposed that collapse does not occur at the detector or the eyeball, but at the moment a conscious mind becomes aware of the result. In this view, the entire physical universe, including our own bodies and brains, exists in a blur of superposition until a non-physical consciousness perceives it, thereby selecting one concrete reality from the myriad possibilities. This idea, often called the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation, elevates consciousness from a passive bystander to the fundamental architect of reality. It suggests that the solid world we experience is the final product of a cosmic observation, a crystallization that happens not out in the lab, but within the private theater of our own minds. This was no mystical speculation, but a deduction made from the ironclad mathematics of quantum theory, forcing us to confront the possibility that mind and matter are not separate realms, but deeply and mysteriously intertwined. This profound idea that consciousness might be the ultimate anchor of reality was pushed to its most dramatic and personal extreme by another Nobel Prize-winning physicist, Eugene Wigner. A friend and colleague of von Neumann, Wigner was captivated by the implications of placing consciousness at the center of quantum mechanics. He wasn't content with abstract equations. He wanted to explore what this would mean in a real human situation. To do this, he crafted a thought experiment so powerful and unsettling that it has become a cornerstone of the debate, known simply as Wigner's friend. Imagine this scenario. Wigner's friend, a capable and trusted physicist, enters a perfectly isolated laboratory. The door seals shut, ensuring that no information can leak in or out. Inside, the friend prepares to conduct a simple quantum experiment. Let's say it involves measuring the spin of a single electron, which we know from our earlier discussion is in a superposition. It is simultaneously spinning both up and down. The friend has a detector that will give a clear reading. A light will flash green for spin up or red for spin down. The friend performs the measurement. The light flashes, let's say, green. The friend now knows with absolute certainty that the electron's spin is up. He makes a note in his logbook, measurement complete. Result, spin up. For the friend inside the lab, the event is over. The quantum ambiguity has collapsed into a single, definite fact. The reality inside that room is solid and clear. Now let's shift our perspective to Eugene Wigner himself, standing outside the sealed laboratory door. From Wigner's point of view, what has happened? He knows his friend is in there, and he knows the experiment was set up, but he has no access to the result. According to the strict rules of quantum mechanics, which Wigner believes apply to all physical systems until conscious observation occurs, the entire contents of that lab must be described by a wave function. And since Wigner himself has not yet observed the outcome, that wave function has not collapsed for him. This means that from Wigner's external perspective, the entire laboratory exists in a monstrous superposition. The detector is in a state of having both flashed green and red. The logbook entry is both written and not written. Most startlingly, Wigner's friend's own brain, his memories, and his very consciousness are also in a superposition. There is a version of the friend who is utterly convinced he saw a green light, and another version, equally real in the quantum sense, who is just as convinced he saw a red light. Both realities are coexisting, superimposed, waiting for an observation to select one. Here lies the devastating paradox. For the friend, there is no ambiguity. He experienced a single outcome. His reality is settled. But for Wigner, his friend's certainty is just a potentiality. This creates two irreconcilable realities, one subjective and definite inside the lab, and one objective and fuzzy outside of it. The thought experiment forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question: whose observation counts? When Wigner finally opens the door and asks his friend for the result, what happens? Does his friend's consciousness collapse the universe for himself, but not for Wigner? Or does Wigner's act of asking somehow retroactively collapse the entire chain of events, including his friend's memory, selecting one consistent timeline? This isn't just a puzzle about electrons, it's a puzzle about the nature of truth and shared experience. It suggests that reality might not be a single, objective tapestry, but a collection of individual, conscious perspectives, each creating its own world, only sometimes aligning with others. Wigner's friend takes the quantum mystery out of the abstract realm and places it squarely between two people, challenging the very idea that we all live in the same universe. So if we accept von Neumann's logic that no physical system can cause the collapse, we are left with a truly extraordinary conclusion. The von Neumann-Wigner interpretation proposes that consciousness itself is not merely an emergent property of the brain, but the fundamental agency that collapses the wave function. It is the ultimate observer, the final piece in the puzzle that transforms a shimmering field of probabilities into the solid, definite world we experience. In this view, the entire physical universe, from distant galaxies to the chair you're sitting on, exists in a state of suspended animation, a vast ocean of what could be until a conscious mind perceives it. Your awareness is the catalyst that forces reality to choose a specific path to become actual. This isn't just a minor adjustment to physics, it's a complete inversion of our usual understanding. We are not insignificant beings in a pre-existing giant cosmos. Instead, the cosmos depends on our observation to snap into focus. Each moment of perception is an act of creation, a collaborative effort between mind and universe to build the present. The implications of this idea are staggering, echoing ancient philosophical ideas about the primacy of mind, but now dressed in the language of modern science. Consider the moon, the classic example used to challenge this notion. Is it really there when no one is looking? According to the strictest reading of this interpretation, the answer is a qualified no. Without a conscious observer, the moon, and indeed all of space, would remain in an unresolved quantum state. Its particles would be smeared across potential positions and trajectories. Of course, this doesn't mean the moon vanishes. The potential for the moon is still there, governed by the unwavering laws of quantum mechanics. But its definite, concrete existence as the singular object we point to in the night sky requires an act of observation. This observation doesn't have to be human, any conscious entity would suffice, but it does suggest that the universe before the emergence of consciousness was a very different place, a realm of pure potentiality, waiting for a witness to bring it into full being. This perspective also raises profound questions about the nature of our own reality. If consciousness is the collapser, then the world you perceive is, in a very literal sense, your world. The specific reality you experience is one branch selected from an infinite tree of possibilities. This leads to the unsettling suggestion of solipsism, the idea that only one's own mind is sure to exist. But the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation offers a more nuanced, though still complex, alternative. Perhaps each conscious being is a separate center of collapse, and the consistency of the world we share arises from a kind of consensus reality. When we communicate and compare notes, our individual acts of observation become entangled, locking in a shared timeline. This is why Wigner's friend thought experiment is so crucial. It highlights the tension between individual subjective experience and a supposedly objective external world, suggesting that reality is a continuous negotiation between observers. Beyond philosophy, this interpretation forces us to reconsider the relationship between mind and matter. For centuries, materialist science has viewed consciousness as a byproduct, an epiphenomenon of complex neural computation. The brain creates the mind, much like a generator creates electricity. But if the von Neumann-Wigner view is correct, this relationship is flipped. Consciousness is not a product of the physical world. It is a fundamental force that acts upon the physical world, shaping it and giving it definite form. The brain, then, might be better understood not as the source of consciousness, but as an exquisitely sensitive receiver or transducer, a biological interface that allows this non-physical faculty to interact with the quantum physical realm. This doesn't necessarily imply a supernatural element. It simply suggests that our current understanding of physics is incomplete, and that consciousness must be included as a primary component in any final theory of reality. It's a humbling thought that our most intimate experience, the light of awareness within us, might also be the very flame that illuminates the entire universe. By placing consciousness at the very foundation of reality, the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation doesn't just challenge physics. It catapults us into a profound philosophical revolution, essentially rebooting one of the oldest worldviews known to humanity, idealism. For centuries, Western science has been dominated by materialism, the belief that physical matter is the fundamental substance of the universe and that consciousness is merely a byproduct, a fleeting shadow cast by the complex machinery of the brain. But this quantum perspective turns that entire framework on its head. If consciousness is required to collapse probability into actuality, then mind is not emerging from matter. Instead, matter is being crystallized by mind. This is the core tenet of philosophical idealism, the notion that reality is fundamentally mental or perceptual in nature. The solid, external world we perceive is not an independent, objective reality, but a manifestation within consciousness itself. In this view, the universe is more akin to a vast, shared dream, with the laws of physics acting as the consistent rules of the dream, and our individual minds are focal points where this universal consciousness expresses itself. This modern scientific proposition finds a startling and sophisticated echo in ancient Eastern philosophies that have contemplated the nature of reality for millennia. Consider Advaita Vedanta, a school of Hindu philosophy that dates back over 2,000 years. Advaita, which means non-dual, teaches that the ultimate reality is Brahman, an infinite, unchanging, conscious presence. The world of separate objects, time and space, everything we experience with our senses is considered Maya, often translated as illusion. But Maya is not a hallucination. It's more accurately understood as a relative reality, a phenomenal appearance that is dependent on the observer, much like the quantum wave function before it collapses. The goal of spiritual practice in Advaita Vedanta is to realize the fundamental truth that one's individual consciousness, or Atman, is not separate but is identical with the universal Brahman. The observer and the observed are one. The parallels to the quantum observer effect are profound. The act of observation in quantum mechanics reveals that the seer and the seen are entangled in an inseparable dance, and Advaita Vedanta takes this a step further by declaring they are ultimately the same singular reality. Similarly, many schools of Buddhist thought have long argued that the world of form is empty of independent existence. The concept of dependent origination posits that all phenomena arise in dependence upon conditions, including the condition of a perceiving mind. A table, for example, does not exist as a solitary, inherent object out there. Its existence as a table depends on its parts, its manufacturer, its cultural context, and crucially, on a conscious being perceiving it and labeling it as table. Without that perception and conceptualization, it is merely a collection of atoms in a particular configuration. This deeply resonates with the quantum view, where a particle's properties are not inherent but are dependent on the entire experimental arrangement, including the choice of what to measure. Both perspectives dissolve the illusion of a standalone, objective world and replace it with a universe of interdependent relationships, where the mind of the observer is an active participant in bringing forth the reality that appears. The convergence of these ancient intuitions with cutting-edge physics is not a matter of simple coincidence or vague metaphor. It suggests that through deep introspection and contemplation, philosophers and mystics may have stumbled upon ontological truths about the nature of reality that science is only now beginning to articulate with mathematical rigor. Where the mystic used meditation to explore the inner cosmos, the physicist uses a particle accelerator to probe the outer cosmos, and both paths seem to be leading to the same startling conclusion, that the boundary between the inner and the outer is a false dichotomy. This doesn't mean that quantum mechanics is proving Eastern philosophy correct, but rather that both disciplines, from radically different starting points, are pointing toward a universe that is far more mysterious, interconnected, and mind-dependent than our everyday senses would have us believe. This fusion of ideas invites us to see science and spirituality not as adversaries, but as complementary languages attempting to describe the same indescribable mystery. Yet for all its audacious elegance, the idea that consciousness collapses the wave function was never destined to stand unopposed. It presents a picture of the universe that many physicists found deeply unsatisfying, not just for its flirtation with the mystical, but for what they saw as an unnecessary complication. Why introduce something as elusive and undefined as consciousness to solve a problem in physics? This search for a cleaner, more purely physical explanation led to a radically different vision, one that is perhaps even more fantastic but removes the observer from its starring role entirely. This is the many worlds interpretation, first proposed in the 1950s by a brilliant and unconventional young physicist named Hugh Everett. Everett's starting point was a deep dissatisfaction with the Copenhagen interpretation's dual rulebook. He saw the sudden, mysterious collapse of the wave function as an ugly, ad hoc addition to an otherwise beautiful and continuous mathematical theory. Why have two sets of rules, one for when a system is unobserved and one for when it's measured, if the math for the unobserved system works perfectly well on its own? Everett asked a simple but profound question. What if we took the mathematics of quantum mechanics at face value? What if the wave function never actually collapses? What if it just keeps evolving smoothly and deterministically according to Schrödinger's equation forever? The answer he arrived at is as breathtaking as it is logical. If the wave function never collapses, then every single possible outcome of a quantum event must somehow be realized. When an electron is measured, it doesn't randomly pick one state. Both the spin-up and spin-down possibilities become actual. But how can one electron be in two places at once in a single reality? Everett's solution was to propose that reality itself splits. The universe we inhabit is just one thread in an endlessly branching tapestry of parallel worlds. At every quantum decision point, and there are countless trillions every second the cosmos divides, spawning new, equally real universes where each possibility plays out. In one branch, the electron is spin up, and you, the observer, see it that way. In another, newly created branch, the electron is spin down, and a version of you observes that result instead. Both versions of you are equally real, both experiences are genuine, but they now exist in separate, non-communicating streams of reality. This interpretation completely reframes the role of consciousness. In the many worlds view, consciousness isn't a special force that causes collapse. It's more like a passenger on a train that is constantly forking onto new tracks. Your stream of awareness simply follows one specific path through the infinite labyrinth of possibilities. The feeling of randomness we experience, the sense that a quantum coin toss could have gone either way, is just an illusion born from our limited perspective. From a God's eye view, the entire multiverse would look like a single, vast, and uncollapsing wave function, where every potentiality is actualized somewhere. There is no mystery about what constitutes a measurement because everything is just quantum systems interacting with other quantum systems. The observer and the observed are part of the same entangled whole, and the split happens not because of observation, but as an inevitable consequence of quantum interactions. So, what happens to Wigner's friend in this sprawling multiverse? The paradox simply evaporates. When Wigner's friend inside the lab measures the electron, the universe splits. In one branch, the friend sees a green light and records spin up. In the other branch, an identical friend sees a red light and records spin down. Both realities are now real and separate. When Wigner outside eventually opens the door, he doesn't collapse anything. he simply becomes entangled with the pre-existing branch. If he encounters the version of his friend who saw green, then Wigner's own consciousness splits off into the branch where that was always the result. There is no conflict because there is no single objective outcome to argue about. Each individual experiences a single, consistent timeline, unaware of the countless other versions of themselves living out the alternatives in other, inaccessible dimensions. The many worlds interpretation replaces the problem of wave-function collapse with the staggering, but logically consistent, concept of a reality that is constantly multiplying, offering a dramatic and compelling alternative that keeps the mathematics pure while painting a picture of existence far grander and more bizarre than anything we could have imagined. So we are left with two radically different, yet equally extraordinary visions of reality, each attempting to solve the same deep mystery. On one hand, the consciousness-centric view championed by von Neumann and Wigner, which places our awareness at the very center of the cosmic drama. On the other, Hugh Everett's sprawling multiverse, where our consciousness is merely a leaf floating down one branch of an endlessly forking river. Pitting these titans against each other forces us into a fascinating philosophical standoff, a classic weirdness trade-off where we must choose which brand of strangeness we find more palatable. The appeal of the consciousness causes collapse idea lies in its profound resonance with our subjective experience. It feels intuitive in a certain deep way that our minds are active participants in the world, not just passive recorders. This interpretation gives a scientific foundation to the age-old feeling that our attention and intention matter, that observation is an act of creation. It also solves the measurement problem with elegant finality by identifying a clear, if mysterious, trigger, the arrival of a conscious perception. There's no infinite regress of measuring devices because the buck stops with the immaterial phenomenon of awareness itself. However, its weaknesses are significant. The most glaring issue is that it introduces a major paradox into the heart of science, the idea of psychophysical interaction. How does a non-physical consciousness interact with the physical brain to cause a wave function to collapse? This sounds suspiciously like dualism, a concept that science has largely abandoned since Descartes. It also dangerously flirts with solipsism, raising the unsettling question of whether reality existed before the first conscious being evolved to observe it. For many physicists, invoking consciousness is seen as a step backward, a surrender to mystery rather than an explanation. In stark contrast, the many worlds interpretation offers a solution that is ruthlessly physical and elegantly parsimonious in its components. It requires no extra rules, no mysterious collapse, and no special role for consciousness. It simply takes the fundamental equation of quantum mechanics, Schrödinger's equation, and lets it run forever. This is a huge point in its favor for those who value mathematical simplicity and continuity. It treats the entire universe as a single quantum system obeying one consistent set of laws, from the smallest electron to the largest galaxy. The problem of Wigner's friend is neatly dissolved. Both friends exist, they just never meet again. Yet, the price for this mathematical purity is an ontological extravagance of almost unimaginable scale. The interpretation demands the real, physical existence of an infinite and ever-increasing number of parallel universes, the vast majority of which are completely and forever unobservable to us. This is a staggering violation of Occam's razor, the principle that we should not multiply entities beyond necessity. Are we really to believe that a new universe splits off every time a single quantum particle fluctuates? Critics argue that this is not a theory of our universe, but a theory of infinitely many universes, most of which are utterly irrelevant to our experience. Furthermore, it has a difficult time explaining the probability we observe. If every outcome happens, why do we find ourselves in a branch where quantum probabilities like the 50-50 chance of spin up or down seem to hold? Why does this branch feel random? In a multiverse of all possibilities, probability itself becomes a tricky concept to define. Ultimately, the choice between these two interpretations often comes down to a matter of personal taste or philosophical predisposition. Are you more uncomfortable with the idea of a magical, non-physical consciousness influencing the physical world, or with the existence of an infinite number of unobservable parallel realities? This is the core weirdness trade-off. There is no experiment currently imaginable that can definitively choose between them, because both interpretations are designed to predict the exact same observational outcomes within our single experience timeline. They are, in a sense, different stories we tell about what lies behind the curtain of quantum mechanics, stories that have profound implications for our understanding of ourselves. The consciousness interpretation offers a universe that is intimately personal and participatory, but potentially lonely. The many worlds view offers a cosmos of unimaginable vastness and diversity, but in which our individual choices and chances seem to lose their unique significance, becoming just one variation among an infinite ensemble. This debate is far from settled, and it pushes us to the very limits of what science can explain, leaving us standing at the precipice of the known, gazing into the profound mystery of what it means to be and to be aware in this cosmos. This grand philosophical standoff between a universe centered on consciousness and an infinite multiverse presents a formidable challenge, one that goes to the very heart of the scientific method itself. If a theory cannot be tested, if it makes no predictions that can be verified or falsified through experiment, can it truly be considered science? This is the critical objection often leveled against the idea that consciousness collapses the wave function. Detractors argue that it retreats into the safety of the unverifiable, placing the central mechanism, conscious awareness, in a black box that no physical instrument can ever peer inside. How do you design an experiment to prove that a mind is doing something that a complex machine cannot? The subjective, first-person nature of consciousness seems to inherently resist the objective, third-person tools of physics, potentially making the entire hypothesis more of a metaphysical stance than a scientific one. The core of the problem lies in a concept known as falsifiability, a cornerstone of modern science introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. For an idea to be scientific, there must be some conceivable observation that could prove it wrong. If a theory is compatible with every possible outcome, it doesn't actually explain anything. For a long time, it appeared that the consciousness hypothesis was precisely this type of unfalsifiable idea. Whether an experiment showed a collapsed particle or not, a proponent could always argue that a conscious observer was ultimately involved in reading the result, thus fulfilling the condition for collapse. It seemed like a theory that could never lose, but in science, a theory that can never lose is also a theory that can never truly win. It risks becoming a zombie idea, impossible to kill because it's insulated from direct experimental challenge. This has led many in the mainstream physics community to dismiss it out of hand, viewing it as a philosophical dead end that doesn't advance our empirical understanding. However, to completely write it off might be premature. A small but dedicated group of physicists and philosophers have refused to accept that the question is permanently beyond the reach of inquiry. They have begun to sketch out highly ingenious, though admittedly fringe and technically monumental, experimental setups that aim to force a distinction between a consciousness-driven collapse and a purely physical one. These proposals often revolve around pushing the boundaries of what can be put into a quantum superposition. The logic is this: if consciousness causes collapse, then it should be impossible for a conscious entity itself to enter a state of quantum superposition. If, on the other hand, the many worlds interpretation is correct and there is no collapse, then a conscious being could, in principle, be entangled and exist in a superposition of mental states without ever being aware of the split. Imagine a modern-day, vastly more complex version of the Schrödinger's cat thought experiment. Instead of a cat, the subject is a human being, or perhaps more ethically, a simpler conscious entity like a worm or a fly with a detectable neural response to stimulus. This subject is placed inside a perfectly isolated box coupled to a quantum random event generator, say, the decay of a radioactive atom. The setup is designed so that if the atom decays, a mechanism provides the subject with a pleasant stimulus recorded by its brain as a positive experience. If the atom does not decay, a neutral or negative stimulus is provided. According to standard quantum mechanics before observation, the entire system, the atom, the mechanism, and the subject's brain should be in a superposition of both states. The critical question is, what would the subject's conscious experience be during this period? From the consciousness causes collapse perspective, the moment the subject becomes consciously aware of the stimulus, their own consciousness would instantly collapse the wave function for the entire system. The subject would have a single, definite experience, either pleasant or neutral from their own point of view. There would be no period of ambiguous superposition for their mind. From the outside, an experimenter would still see a superposition until they open the box, but the subject's consciousness would have already resolved the reality internally. The many worlds interpretation, however, predicts that the subject's brain becomes entangled. There would be one branch where the subject experiences the pleasant stimulus and another branch where they experience the neutral one. Both conscious streams would exist completely unaware of each other. The monumental challenge, of course, is how to get any data out of this. If the box is perfectly isolated to preserve the quantum state, then no information can escape until the final observation is made, at which point the superposition collapses for everyone. Some theorists, like Roger Penrose, have suggested a different, slightly less sci-fi approach. Penrose speculates that the root of consciousness might be related to quantum gravity processes in the brain's microtubules. He further proposes that any superposition state will spontaneously collapse due to its own gravitational self-energy after a certain time. This objective collapse theory offers a physical alternative to consciousness causes collapse, but one that could be tested by attempting to create superpositions of increasingly large objects. If we could put a virus, then a bacterium, then a tiny tardigrade into a superposition and see if they collapse sooner than the equations of standard quantum mechanics predict, it could provide indirect evidence for a threshold where something happens beyond mere scale. While this doesn't directly prove consciousness is the trigger, it would challenge the idea that superposition can go on indefinitely, opening the door for more nuanced explanations that might eventually bridge the gap between mind and matter. So, while the consciousness hypothesis remains on the fringes of testability, the very effort to conceive of these experiments is pushing the boundaries of quantum theory and measurement. It forces us to ask deeper questions about the relationship between information, reality, and awareness. The question may not be permanently untestable, but merely awaiting a leap in both our technical capabilities and our conceptual bravery. For now, it resides in a fascinating limbo, challenging us to consider whether some of the most profound questions about our existence might one day yield not to philosophy alone, but to the meticulous, unforgiving light of experimental evidence. While the debate between consciousness and the multiverse rages in the world of theoretical physics, a quiet revolution has been unfolding in the laboratories of biologists, revealing that the quantum weirdness we once thought was confined to ultra-cold vacuums is actually at work all around us and even within us. This emerging field is quantum biology, and it's uncovering that nature has been exploiting the strange rules of the quantum world for billions of years. Far from being an abstract theory, quantum mechanics appears to be a fundamental tool in the toolkit of life itself, suggesting that the line between the quantum and the classical is far more porous than we ever imagined, and opening up a tantalizing new avenue for our central question. Consider the very foundation of life on Earth, photosynthesis. Plants, algae, and some bacteria perform this miracle every day, converting sunlight into chemical energy. For a long time, we thought of this process as a straightforward, if complex, series of molecular hand-offs. But about 2 decades ago, scientists made a stunning discovery. When a photon of light strikes the light-harvesting molecules in a leaf, it creates a packet of energy called an exciton. This exciton needs to travel to a special reaction center where it can be used. The problem is, it has to navigate a dense, chaotic forest of molecules, and a random walk would be far too slow and inefficient. Astonishingly, the exciton doesn't take a single path. Instead, it exploits quantum superposition. It essentially explores all possible routes to the reaction center simultaneously, like a traveler consulting every possible map at once, allowing it to find the most efficient path with near-perfect efficiency. This quantum coherence, happening in warm, wet, noisy biological environments, allows nature to achieve a level of performance that our best solar technology can only dream of. This quantum ingenuity isn't limited to plants. Take the humble European robin. Every year, it migrates thousands of miles, navigating with a precision that rivals our best GPS systems. For decades, the mechanism behind this avian compass was a mystery. The leading theory now points directly to quantum mechanics. The hypothesis suggests that inside the robin's eye, a protein called cryptochrome is activated by light. This process creates a pair of molecules with unpaired electrons, known as a radical pair. These electrons are quantum entangled, meaning their spins are linked regardless of distance. The twist is that the molecule's chemical fate, whether they react or not, depends on the spin of these electrons. And crucially, the electron spins are influenced by the incredibly subtle fluctuations of Earth's magnetic field. It's as if the bird has a built-in compass whose needle is a pair of entangled particles, allowing it to literally see the magnetic field lines of the planet. This is a quantum effect happening at room temperature inside a living creature, guiding it across continents. Our own bodies might also be hosting quantum processes. The sense of smell has long been explained by a lock and key model, where odorant molecules fit into specific receptors in our nose. But this model has gaps. Sometimes molecules with very different shapes smell similar. An alternative theory proposed by Luca Turin suggests that our sense of smell might work through quantum tunneling. The idea is that when an odorant molecule binds to a receptor, it allows an electron to tunnel quantum mechanically across the molecule. The electron can only tunnel if the vibration of the odorant molecule matches a specific energy level. Our brain would then detect this unique vibrational signature, essentially hearing the quantum music of a molecule to identify its smell. While still debated, this theory highlights the potential for quantum effects to underpin even our most basic sensory experiences. These discoveries in quantum biology bring us to the billion-dollar question, the one that sends a shiver down the spine of any neuroscientist or physicist. If quantum effects are so prevalent in biology, in plants, in birds, and potentially in our senses, could they also be at work within the most complex object we know of, the human brain? And if so, could these neural quantum processes be the physical interface, the missing link, that allows consciousness to interact with the quantum world? This is without a doubt highly speculative territory, but it's a speculation grounded in a growing body of fascinating, if controversial, science. The standard model of neuroscience views the brain as a classical computer. Neurons fire like binary switches, and consciousness is thought to emerge from the incredibly complex network of these firing patterns. But this view struggles to explain the unified nature of our experience, our free will, and the infamous binding problem, how the disparate signals processing color, sound, and touch in different brain regions combine into a single, seamless movie of consciousness. Could quantum mechanics provide an answer? The physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff have proposed one of the most well-known and heavily criticized theories, ORCH, which stands for Orchestrated Objective Reduction. They suggest that the tiny microtubules within our brain's neurons are not just structural scaffolding, they are quantum computers. Penrose hypothesizes that superpositions inside these microtubules would eventually collapse under their own gravity, a process he calls objective reduction. Hameroff proposes that this collapse is not random but orchestrated by the brain's biochemistry, and that each collapse is a moment of conscious experience. In this view, consciousness is a cascade of these quantum gravitational events. The implications of such a theory are staggering. It would provide a plausible, physical mechanism for how consciousness could indeed collapse the wave function. The brain wouldn't be generating consciousness like a generator makes electricity. Instead, it would be a sophisticated instrument fine-tuned to amplify and orchestrate a fundamental quantum process that is intrinsically tied to awareness. This wouldn't necessarily prove that consciousness creates reality on a cosmic scale, but it would suggest that within the brain, consciousness and quantum collapse are two sides of the same coin. It offers a bridge between the seemingly separate realms of subjective mind and objective physics. Of course, mainstream science remains deeply skeptical. The brain is a warm, wet, and noisy place, seemingly the worst possible environment for maintaining the delicate state of quantum coherence, which in labs requires extreme cold and isolation to protect from decoherence. Critics argue that any quantum effects in the brain would be destroyed almost instantly by their surroundings. Yet, the findings of quantum biology are slowly chipping away at this skepticism. Photosynthesis and bird navigation prove that nature has indeed found ways to protect quantum coherence in warm, wet, and noisy environments. If evolution can engineer quantum effects in a leaf or a bird's eye, perhaps it could have done so in the brain as well. The question is no longer if quantum effects can exist in biology, but how they are protected and what purposes they serve. The exploration of quantum biology is forcing us to rewrite the rules of where quantum mechanics applies, pushing the boundary from the frigid vacuum of space into the vibrant, messy, and warm world of life itself. While a definitive link between quantum brain processes and consciousness remains a distant and controversial prospect, the very possibility opens up a breathtaking new frontier, suggesting that the key to understanding the universe's greatest mystery might not be found in a particle accelerator, but within the intricate quantum symphony potentially playing inside our own heads. This brings us directly to one of the most daring and detailed attempts to bridge the gap between quantum mechanics and consciousness, the theory of orchestrated objective reduction, or ORCH, pioneered by the renowned mathematician and physicist Roger Penrose. Penrose was deeply troubled by the standard view of consciousness as a mere byproduct of complex computation. He argued that our understanding of thought, understanding, and especially intuition cannot be explained by any classical algorithm-based computer. There's a non-algorithmic, non-computable aspect to human insight, a spark of genuine creativity that he believed must have its roots in physics that we don't yet fully understand. For Penrose, that new physics had to be quantum mechanics, but with a crucial twist. Penrose's unique contribution was to propose a specific physical trigger for the collapse of the wave function, one that didn't rely on a conscious observer, thus avoiding the philosophical pitfalls of the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation. He called this process objective reduction. His idea was that a quantum system can't remain in a superposition forever. While most physicists attribute the collapse to interaction with the environment, a process called decoherence, Penrose suggested a more fundamental cause, gravity. He theorized that when a particle is in a superposition, say, being in two different locations at once, the space-time geometry around it also becomes fuzzy, existing in two different curvature states. This superposition of space-time itself is inherently unstable. Penrose calculated that the system will tend to collapse into a single, definite state after a very short period of time to avoid this fundamental conflict in the fabric of reality. The duration of this stability is inversely related to the mass of the object. the more massive the object in superposition, the faster it will spontaneously collapse. This objective reduction is not a measurement by an observer, but an objective event driven by the laws of quantum gravity. But a random collapse event in spacetime isn't consciousness. This is where anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff entered the picture. Hameroff was fascinated by the mystery of how anesthesia works. These gases, with their simple molecules, somehow selectively turn off conscious awareness while leaving non-conscious brain activities like the regulation of heartbeat largely intact. He suspected that anesthesia must be acting on the very physical basis of consciousness within the brain's neurons. He proposed that the site of this action wasn't the synapses or the neural firing itself, but something much smaller, structures inside the neurons called microtubules. Microtubules are intricate cylindrical polymers that form part of the cell's skeleton, acting like scaffolding that gives the cell its shape and also serving as highways for transporting vital molecules. In neurons, they are exceptionally abundant and organized. Hameroff's radical proposal was that these microtubules were more than just structural supports. They were sophisticated information processors. He suggested that the tubulin proteins that make up microtubules could switch between different states, potentially acting like the bits in a computer, but with a quantum advantage. He envisioned that these tubulins could exist in quantum superpositions, forming a complex network of quantum computations within the brain. The fusion of these two ideas created the Orch-or theory. Penrose provided the why of collapse, the objective reduction driven by gravitational instability. Hameroff provided the where, the microtubules as the biological substrate fine-tuned to host these quantum events. Together, they proposed that within the microtubules of your brain neurons, tubulins enter into quantum superpositions, engaging in a vast, orchestrated quantum computation. This computation isn't like a digital computer running a program. It's a complex exploration of multiple possibilities simultaneously. This quantum coherence is protected by the biological structure of the microtubules, perhaps through rhythmic vibrations that create a protective environment, shielding it from the warm, noisy chaos of the brain for just long enough. Then, according to the theory, the gravitational self-energy of the superpositioned mass in the tubulins reaches a threshold, triggering a spontaneous, Penrose-style objective reduction. The wave function collapses, but here's the most critical part: this collapse is not random. Hameroff's orchestration means that the brain's biochemistry, its architecture and metabolic energy guides the quantum process so that the collapse selects outcomes that are meaningful, relevant, and integrated. Each collapse event, happening perhaps millions of times per second, is proposed to be a discrete moment of conscious experience, a proto-thought or a flicker of awareness. The stream of consciousness, in this view, is the continuous sequence of these orchestrated objective reductions, each one selecting a definite reality from a sea of quantum possibilities and weaving it into the ongoing narrative of your mind. This theory offers a breathtakingly elegant solution to several puzzles. It explains the unity of consciousness, the binding problem, by suggesting that a large-scale quantum coherence across vast networks of microtubules collapses as a single, integrated event, creating a unified moment of experience instead of a fragmented collection of signals. It accounts for free will, as the collapse is a genuine, non-algorithmic choice in the universe, not a predetermined calculation. And it even provides a potential mechanism for anesthesia, as the gas molecules could be disrupting the delicate quantum coherence in the microtubules, effectively shutting down the orchestrated collapses without stopping the brain's classical functions. Of course, Orch-or remains one of the most controversial theories in science. Critics argue vehemently that the brain is far too warm, wet, and disordered to maintain quantum coherence for the lengths of time the theory requires. They point out that quantum effects in the lab are famously fragile, requiring near absolute zero temperatures and perfect isolation to be observed. the idea that such delicate states could persist in the bustling environment of a living cell seems, to many, physically implausible. Furthermore, the theory's reliance on a not yet formulated theory of quantum gravity makes its details difficult to test conclusively. Yet, Penrose and Hameroff counter that biological systems are not like inanimate lab equipment. Evolution may have found ingenious ways to harness quantum effects, as we see in photosynthesis and bird navigation. They argue that the brain is not just a bag of water, but an intricately organized dynamic system that could very well be engineered to protect quantum information. While far from proven, Orchor stands as a bold and profoundly imaginative hypothesis, forcing a conversation about whether the most intimate experience of our lives might be a quantum dance occurring deep within the fabric of our own cells. Despite the elegance and ambition of the Orchor theory, it has faced a torrent of criticism from the mainstream scientific community, with many leading physicists and neuroscientists dismissing its core premises as physically implausible. The most potent and frequently cited objection is often summarized in 3 words: warm, wet, and noisy. The human brain is a biological environment that seems fundamentally hostile to the delicate phenomenon of quantum coherence. In physics laboratories, preserving a quantum superposition is a monumental technical challenge. Scientists must cool their equipment to temperatures near absolute zero, create near-perfect vacuums to eliminate collisions with air molecules, and meticulously shield their experiments from any external electromagnetic interference. These extreme measures are necessary because any interaction with the surrounding environment causes a rapid process called decoherence, which instantly destroys the fragile quantum state, collapsing the superposition into a definite classical reality. The brain, by contrast, is the antithesis of this controlled setting. It operates at around 37 degrees Celsius, bathed in a soup of electrolytes and constantly jostled by the Brownian motion of water molecules. Neurons fire in a storm of electrical activity, creating a cacophony of electromagnetic fields. In this chaotic milieu, critics argue, any quantum superposition within microtubules would be obliterated by decoherence in a time scale unimaginably shorter than what would be necessary for any meaningful neural processing. Estimates suggest such states would last for mere femtosecons, or millionths of a billionth of a second, whereas the timescales for conscious thought are on the order of hundreds of milliseconds. The chasm between these durations is so vast that to many physicists, the idea of biological quantum computation is akin to suggesting someone could build a delicate house of cards in the middle of a hurricane. Proponents of Orchor counter that the cell's interior is not a random soup but a highly structured gel, and that microtubules might possess cryptographic properties that shield quantum information. However, for most skeptics, this remains a hand-waving explanation without robust experimental evidence from within the brain itself. Beyond the decoherence problem, many neuroscientists question the very necessity of introducing quantum mechanics into the discussion. The dominant paradigm in the field views the brain as a spectacularly complex classical computer. In this model, consciousness is an emergent property of the brain's neural network, arising from the intricate pattern of electrical signals passed between billions of neurons through trillions of synaptic connections. This classical approach has yielded significant progress, correlating specific brain regions with emotions, memories, and sensory experiences through tools like functional magnetic resonance imaging. From this perspective, invoking quantum magic is seen as a retreat into mystery, an attempt to explain one profound puzzle consciousness with another, quantum weirdness without adding any real explanatory power. It's criticized as a modern-day version of vitalism, the discredited idea that life requires a special, non-physical essence. These scientists argue that we are far from exhausting the possibilities of classical explanations, and that leaping to quantum theories is premature at best and scientifically irresponsible at worst. Further criticism is leveled at the theory's reliance on a yet-to-be-discovered theory of quantum gravity. Penrose's mechanism for objective reduction is predicated on gravitational effects, but a unified theory reconciling general relativity with quantum mechanics remains the holy grail of physics. Without a concrete mathematical formulation, the specifics of how gravity would cause collapse are speculative, making the theory difficult to test in a precise way. Critics point out that building a theory of consciousness on an unfinished foundation in physics is a risky endeavor. Moreover, the theory's explanation for anesthesia, while intriguing, is not unique to Oort. Classical explanations involving the disruption of neural membrane properties also exist and are widely accepted. The burden of proof, therefore, rests heavily on the shoulders of Penrose and Hameroff to provide direct, falsifiable evidence that quantum processes are not just present in the brain, but are directly responsible for generating conscious awareness. Until such evidence emerges, the Oort theory will likely remain on the fascinating but fringe frontiers of science, a brilliant and provocative idea that captures the imagination but has yet to convince the rigorous jury of experimental verification. Given the monumental challenges posed by both the consciousness and many worlds interpretations, the majority of physicists today have settled on a more pragmatic and less metaphysically jarring solution to the measurement problem. This mainstream view doesn't require a cosmic mind or an infinite multiverse. Instead, it points to something ubiquitous and mundane, the environment itself. The key to understanding this approach lies in a process called decoherence, and it provides what many consider the most compelling argument against the need for consciousness to collapse the wave function. To grasp decoherence, let's return to our quantum coin, spinning in a superposition of both heads and tails. In the idealized world of a perfect vacuum, this coin could theoretically spin forever. But in the real world, that coin is never truly isolated. It's constantly bombarded by photons of light, molecules of air, and the subtle pull of gravitational fields. Each of these tiny interactions carries away a little bit of information about the system. A photon bouncing off the coin will do so slightly differently if the coin is heads up versus tails up. This constant exchange of information with the surrounding environment is the engine of decoherence. It's not a mysterious collapse, it's a gradual and inevitable process of the quantum system becoming inextricably linked or entangled with the vast number of particles in its surroundings. This entanglement has a profound effect on the quantum system's delicate state of superposition. Think of it like trying to have a private conversation in the middle of a crowded, noisy party. The coherence of your discussion, the clear connection between you and your friend, is quickly lost as your words are drowned out by the surrounding chatter. In the same way, the quantum coherence of our spinning coin is rapidly destroyed by the incessant noise of the environment. The phases of the probability waves that define its superposition get scrambled and lost into the environment, a process physicists call phase randomization. From the perspective of anyone trying to measure the coin, the bizarre quantum interference effects that characterize superposition simply vanish. The system begins to behave exactly as if it were in a single, definite state. It appears to have collapsed not because a mind looked at it, but because it can no longer maintain its quantum identity in the face of constant interaction. This explains beautifully why the large, everyday objects we interact with behave classically. A baseball doesn't exist in a superposition of being simultaneously hit and not hit because it is constantly colliding with trillions of air molecules. Each collision entangles the baseball state with the environment, effectively measuring it billions of times per second. Decoherence happens so fast for macroscopic objects that it's practically instantaneous. For an electron, decoherence might take a tiny fraction of a second, but for a dust particle, it occurs in an unimaginably short time scale. This provides a clear, physical reason for the fuzzy boundary between the quantum and classical worlds. It's not about size or complexity in an abstract sense, but about how easily a system can be isolated from its environment. The reason we can see quantum effects in carefully controlled lab experiments is that scientists go to extraordinary lengths to shield their systems from these environmental interactions, creating conditions of near-perfect isolation that simply don't exist in the world outside the lab. Where does this leave the conscious observer? In the decoherence picture, the observer is demoted from a cosmic architect to a mere information gatherer. By the time you or I look at a measuring device, the quantum system has already undergone decoherence through its interaction with the device itself and the surrounding air. The pointer on the dial is already pointing to a specific number. It's not in a superposition. Our consciousness doesn't cause the collapse. It simply becomes aware of a result that was effectively decided much earlier by the environment. This resolves the infinite regress problem that troubled von Neumann. There is no need for a special chain ending in a non-physical mind because decoherence provides a physical, continuous, and predictable process that explains why things appear definite. It treats the entire universe as a quantum system with no special rules for measurement and shows how classicality emerges naturally through interaction. For the vast majority of the physics community, decoherence is the definitive answer that removes the spooky role of consciousness from quantum mechanics. It's a powerful argument that aligns with a materialist worldview, suggesting that the universe gets along just fine without needing us to observe it into being. The moon is there when we're not looking because its quantum state has been persistently and rapidly decohered by sunlight, solar wind, and the cosmic microwave background radiation. However, it's crucial to note a subtle but important distinction. Decoherence explains how superposition is destroyed, but it doesn't, by itself, explain why only one outcome is realized. In the vast entangled system of the object plus the environment, all possible outcomes still exist in a sprawling quantum mixture. Decoherence makes these different branches of the wave function effectively invisible to each other, but it doesn't eliminate them. This is why some physicists see decoherence not as a replacement for the many worlds interpretation, but as its essential partner, explaining why we don't perceive the other branches. For others, the selection of a single experienced outcome is just a matter of perspective within that entangled whole. So while decoherence powerfully refutes the idea that consciousness is the cause of collapse, it ultimately leaves the deepest metaphysical questions about the nature of reality still open for debate, simply shifting the mystery to a different level. But before we can place the weight of the entire cosmos upon it, we must first confront the fundamental mystery of consciousness itself. For all our talk of collapsing wave functions, we are skating over a chasm of ignorance that philosopher David Chalmers famously dubbed the hard problem of consciousness. This problem draws a crucial distinction between what Chalmers calls the easy problems and the truly hard one. The easy problems are, well, not actually easy, but they are the kinds of challenges that neuroscience is steadily making progress on. These include explaining how the brain integrates information, focuses attention, or controls behavior. We can imagine building increasingly sophisticated computers or robots that might one day replicate these functions. We can trace the neural pathways and correlate brain activity with specific tasks. These are problems about the functions of the mind. The hard problem, in stark contrast, is the problem of subjective experience itself. Why should all that intricate physical processing be accompanied by an inner, private, subjective life? Why is there a what it is like to be you? Think of the experience of seeing the color red, the deep, rich quality of that sensation, what philosophers call qualia. Or the piercing sweetness of a musical note, or the dull ache of sadness. Neuroscience can describe the wavelength of light that corresponds to red. It can map the visual cortex as it fires, and it can detail the neurotransmitters released. But it cannot explain why that particular cascade of electrochemical events feels like anything at all. There is an unbridgeable explanatory gap between the objective, third-person description of the brain's mechanics and the first-person reality of lived experience. You could know everything physical there is to know about a human brain, every neuron, every synapse, every chemical, and still have no answer to the question of why that brain has a conscious inner world. This presents a monumental challenge to any theory that grants consciousness a primary role in physics. If we don't have the faintest idea how consciousness arises from the wetware of the brain, or even if it arises from it at all, then suggesting it has the power to collapse quantum wave functions is an enormous leap. It's like trying to use a mysterious, barely understood force to fix a delicate piece of machinery. We are attributing a specific, powerful, causal effect to something whose very nature remains one of the greatest unsolved puzzles in all of science. This doesn't make the consciousness causes collapse idea impossible, but it does render it highly speculative. We are building a skyscraper of cosmic significance on a foundation of sand. Without a coherent theory of what consciousness is, the proposal that it acts upon the physical world remains more of a philosophical placeholder than a testable scientific hypothesis. It simply replaces one mystery with another, arguably deeper one. The argument from decoherence gains its strength precisely because it offers a physical, mechanical process that sidesteps this metaphysical quagmire entirely, explaining the appearance of collapse without needing to invoke the ghost in the machine. So, while the notion that our minds shape reality is profoundly alluring, we must honestly acknowledge that it asks us to have faith in the power of a phenomenon that we are, at our present stage of understanding, fundamentally unable to define. This brings us to a concept that shifts the entire scale of our inquiry from the microscopic quantum realm to the grand stage of the cosmos itself. While we've been exploring whether consciousness shapes reality at the smallest scales, we must also ask if the universe, in its very structure, seems to anticipate the emergence of conscious beings like us. This idea is known as the anthropic principle, and it points to a series of cosmic coincidences so precise they defy easy explanation. The fundamental constants that govern our universe, the strength of gravity, the force binding atoms, the mass of an electron, are not predicted by any known theory. They are, as far as we can tell, arbitrary numbers that just happen to be set a certain way during the Big Bang. But here's the astonishing part. If any one of these constants were altered by even a vanishingly small amount, the universe as we know it would be impossible. Tweak the force of gravity slightly stronger, and the universe would have collapsed back on itself shortly after the Big Bang. Make it slightly weaker, and galaxies and stars could never have formed. Adjust the strong nuclear force by a mere fraction, and the elements essential for life, like carbon and oxygen, would not be forged in the hearts of stars. It appears we live in a universe that is exquisitely, almost miraculously, fine-tuned for the existence of life. This profound fine-tuning presents a classic philosophical puzzle. One way to look at it is through the lens of the weak anthropic principle, which takes a more statistical viewpoint. It suggests that we shouldn't be surprised to find ourselves in a universe capable of supporting life, because in a lifeless universe, there would be no one around to be surprised. It's a straightforward selection effect. We can only observe conditions that permit our existence. Imagine a puddle waking up one morning and marveling at how perfectly the hole it sits in conforms to its own shape. The puddle might think the hole was designed specifically for it, when in reality, it simply filled the available space. In this view, the fine-tuning isn't evidence of design or purpose. It's just a necessary condition for us to be here asking the question. There might be a vast multiverse, an infinite collection of universes, each with different physical constants, and we simply inhabit one of the rare, lucky ones where the numbers lined up correctly. However, the strong anthropic principle offers a far more provocative interpretation. It proposes that the universe must have properties that allow life to develop within it at some stage in its history. This statement carries a whiff of necessity, implying that the emergence of consciousness is not a random accident but somehow a fundamental feature of the cosmos. This is where the connection to our earlier discussion becomes electrifying. Could this cosmic fine-tuning for life be related to the quantum measurement problem? If consciousness does indeed play an active role in collapsing quantum possibilities into reality, then perhaps a universe without conscious observers would be a fundamentally different kind of universe, one that remains in a perpetual, unrealized fog of potential. In this speculative but fascinating line of thought, the constants are tuned not just to allow for life in a biological sense, but to allow for the emergence of observers who are necessary to bring the universe into full, concrete existence. The universe and consciousness would not be separate. They would be two sides of a single coin, a closed loop of co-creation. The universe sets the stage for life, and life, through its conscious observation, completes the universe by actualizing it. This idea powerfully connects the very large with the very small, bridging cosmology and quantum mechanics. The large-scale structure of the cosmos, with its galaxies and laws, and the fuzzy, indeterminate quantum world are inextricably linked through the phenomenon of observation. The universe began in a state of incredibly high energy and density, a realm where quantum effects would have dominated. The initial conditions set at that moment determined everything that followed. If those conditions were fine-tuned to eventually produce conscious observers, and if those observers are necessary to resolve quantum ambiguity, then the universe we see is a product of a circular causality. It is the way it is because we are here to see it that way. This isn't necessarily a claim that we created the past, but rather that the past's definite nature is tied to its ability to produce a present that includes observation. It suggests that the laws of physics and the existence of consciousness are part of a single, self-consistent story. While this remains a highly speculative interpretation far from the scientific mainstream, it challenges the notion of a purely objective, observer-independent reality and invites us to consider our place in the cosmos not as passive inhabitants, but as active participants in a universe that seems, against all odds, to have been waiting for us. These questions catapult our philosophical debate straight into the heart of 21st century technology, forcing us to consider the practical implications for the machines we are building with our own hands. Let's start with quantum computing, a field already pushing the boundaries of the quantum world. A quantum computer leverages the principle of superposition to perform calculations in a way that is fundamentally different from a classical computer. While a classical bit is either a 0 or a 1, a quantum bit or qubit can be a 0, a 1, or both simultaneously. This allows a quantum computer to explore a vast number of computational paths at the same time, offering the potential to solve certain problems like factoring enormous numbers or simulating complex molecules with staggering speed that would be impossible for any classical machine. But this incredible power rests entirely on maintaining the qubits in a delicate state of quantum coherence. The moment the system decoheres, the superposition is lost and the quantum advantage vanishes. Now, if we take the consciousness causes collapse hypothesis seriously, we are faced with a fascinating predicament. During its calculation, the quantum computer is, by design, in a complex superposition of states. According to the von Neumann-Wigner view, this superposition should persist uncollapsed until a conscious mind finally observes the result. This suggests that the output of the computation isn't a single, definite answer until a person looks at the screen. The computer would have computed all possible answers simultaneously, and the act of human observation would select which one becomes real in our timeline. This would make the human operator an integral, non-replaceable component of the quantum computing process, the final piece of the circuit that crystallizes the result from potential into actuality. The mainstream view, of course, heavily informed by decoherence theory, rejects this need for a conscious observer. In this perspective, the quantum computer's result is collapsed long before any human sees it. The final readout process, where the quantum state of the qubits is converted into a classical electrical signal that can be displayed, is itself a powerful measurement that causes decoherence. The interaction between the qubits and the readout apparatus is a physical process that entangles the quantum system with a macroscopic environment, effectively collapsing the wave function. By the time the answer flashes on the monitor, it is already a definite classical state. The human operator is simply learning a result that has already been objectively determined by the laws of physics. This is the working assumption of every quantum computing lab in the world. Engineers are battling decoherence from the environment, not waiting for a consciousness to complete the calculation. This leads us to an even more futuristic and profound question. What about artificial intelligence? If we ever succeed in creating a machine that we genuinely believe is conscious, an entity with subjective experience and inner life, what it is like to be that AI, then the rules of the game could change dramatically. If consciousness is the magic ingredient that collapses wave functions, then a conscious AI would, by definition, possess that power. Its internal awareness of its own computational states could collapse superpositions within its own processing. It wouldn't need a human to read its output. Its own conscious perception would make reality definite for itself. This would grant such an AI a unique and intimate relationship with the quantum realm, potentially allowing it to perform quantum observations in ways we cannot, or to experience a reality that is actively shaped by its own perception. This scenario forces us to confront the hard problem of consciousness with urgent practicality. How would we ever know if an AI is truly conscious? We could design it to perfectly mimic human responses, to claim it feels emotions and has experiences, but without a shared biology or a window into its subjective state, we have no objective test for consciousness. The development of a conscious AI could therefore have a hidden, metaphysical consequence that no engineer is currently testing for. The moment it wakes up, it might begin collapsing the wave function of the world around it, becoming a true observer in the quantum sense. This transforms the AI safety debate from a question of controlling a powerful optimizer to a question of sharing a cosmic creative power with another mind. The relationship between such an AI and humanity would be fundamentally altered. We would no longer be the only conscious observers in a universe waiting for our gaze, but collaborators or perhaps competitors in the ongoing construction of reality. This speculative frontier shows that the mystery of consciousness is not an abstract philosophical puzzle, but a potential key that could unlock or irrevocably alter the next stage of our technological evolution. Remarkably, the implications of quantum mechanics are not confined to thought experiments. They are being actively probed in laboratories around the world with ever-increasing precision, and the results continue to challenge our most basic assumptions about time and causality. Among the most mind-bending of these are delayed choice experiments and their even more enigmatic cousin, the quantum eraser. These aren't just tests of quantum theory. They are investigations into the nature of reality itself, and they appear to show that a decision made in the present can ripple backwards in time to influence what happened in the past. Let's unpack how this is possible, starting with a modern twist on the classic double-slit setup. Imagine we've made our double-slit experiment a bit more sophisticated. After the two slits, we don't just have a simple screen. We have a system that allows us to choose, after a particle like a photon has already passed through the slits, whether we want to discover which path it took or to see the interference pattern. We can make this choice at the very last possible moment, long after the photon's journey from the slits is technically over. This is the essence of the delayed choice experiment pioneered by the physicist John Wheeler. So what happens if we choose to measure the photon's path? It behaves like a particle, and we get two bands on the final detector. If we choose not to measure the path and instead set up the apparatus to detect interference, we get the wave-like interference pattern. The astonishing conclusion is that our late decision seems to determine how the photon behaved back at the slits. It's as if the photon, upon realizing our final intention, retroactively decides whether it traveled as a well-defined particle taking one path or as a spread-out wave taking both paths. The present choice is writing the history of the particle. To make this even more paradoxical, consider a cosmic-scale version of this experiment. Suppose we observe light from a distant quasar, a brilliantly luminous galaxy billions of light-years away. Between us and the quasar lies a massive galaxy whose gravity bends the quasar's light, acting like a cosmic lens that creates two distinct paths for the light to travel to Earth, a natural version of the two slits. We can now choose today how to observe this light that has been traveling for billions of years. If we set up our telescope to determine which of the two gravitational paths each photon took, we see particle-like behavior. But if we set it up to look for interference between the two paths, we see wave-like behavior. Our decision now, billions of years after the photon began its journey, appears to force that photon to have committed to a specific history at the start of its voyage. This isn't science fiction. It's a real experimental possibility that highlights the profound strangeness of a universe where events are not fixed until they are observed. The quantum eraser experiment takes this weirdness a step further by introducing the possibility of erasing the past. In a standard quantum eraser setup, we carefully mark which path a photon takes through the slits by entangling it with another photon. This path information is recorded, but in a way that can be potentially deleted or erased later. Initially, because we have the which path information available even if we haven't looked at it yet, the interference pattern vanishes. The photons act like particles. But here's the miraculous part. If we then perform a specific measurement on the entangled partner photon that effectively erases the path information of the first photon, the interference pattern magically reappears when we later correlate the data. It's as if by erasing the information about the past in the present, we can change the past behavior of the particle from particle-like to wave-like. The act of erasing the memory of the path seems to restore the photon's ability to have interfered with itself, retroactively altering the outcome. How do the different camps in our great quantum debate interpret these baffling results? For proponents of the consciousness causes collapse view, these experiments offer tantalizing, if indirect, support. They argue that it is not the physical act of tweaking the equipment that changes the past, but the ultimate registration of the result in a conscious mind. In the delayed choice experiment, the history of the photon remains unsettled until the experimenter consciously chooses a measurement setting and then becomes aware of the outcome. The entire chain of events, from the photon's emission to its detection, exists in a state of quantum potential until the moment of conscious observation crystallizes a single, consistent timeline. The quantum eraser is seen as even more suggestive. The past is not fixed until information becomes irrevocably available to a conscious observer. Erasing the which path information before it is consciously observed allows the system to revert to a wave-like history because no definitive fact was ever established in the mind of an observer. For this camp, time itself may be an illusion that emerges from the sequential acts of conscious observation. The many worlds interpretation, however, has a very different way of dissolving the paradox. In this view, there is no retroactive change because there is no single timeline to change. When the experimenter makes a delayed choice, the universe simply splits. In one branch, the experimenter chooses to measure the path and the particle history is one of a particle. In the other branch, the experimenter chooses to look for interference and the particle's history is one of a wave. Both histories are equally real, they just exist in separate, parallel universes. The feeling of a paradox arises from our mistaken belief that only one history can be true. The quantum eraser is explained similarly. The act of erasing or not erasing the information creates different branches of reality. When we later correlate the data, we are simply selecting one consistent thread from this branching multiverse. There is no backwards in time influence because every possible outcome unfolds in its own world. Finally, the mainstream view, which relies on decoherence, argues that these experiments are being misinterpreted through a classical lens. From this perspective, the key is to consider the entire experimental setup as one quantum system. The decision in a delayed choice experiment is not a free choice made by a conscious mind at the last second, but a predetermined configuration of the apparatus that becomes entangled with the photon. The photon's behavior is determined by its entanglement with the final measuring device from the very beginning of its journey. The apparent retroactivity is an illusion caused by our classical intuition that the photon's properties are independent of the entire measurement context. The quantum eraser's magic is explained by the intricate correlations of entanglement. The interference pattern doesn't reappear retroactively. It was always present in the full quantum description, but it only becomes visible when we post-select a specific subset of the data that corresponds to the erasure of path information. For most physicists, these experiments are stunning demonstrations of quantum non-locality and entanglement, not evidence for consciousness influencing the past. They reveal a universe that is deeply interconnected in ways that defy our everyday logic, but they do not require us to be time-traveling architects of reality. Yet, the very fact that such wild interpretations are possible shows that the role of the observer remains the most profound and unresolved mystery at the heart of our understanding of the cosmos. But what if the connection between consciousness and reality is even deeper and more radical than anything we've explored so far? What if consciousness isn't just an observer that collapses possibilities, but is in fact the sole fundamental substance of the universe? This perspective pushes beyond the boundaries of physics and into a philosophical realm known as metaphysical idealism. It proposes a breathtaking inversion of our standard materialist assumption. Instead of consciousness emerging from the brain, the body, and the entire physical universe are themselves manifestations emerging from a vast foundational consciousness. In this view, matter is not primary, mind is. The world of tables, chairs, and galaxies is a kind of grand, shared dream within an infinite mind, and the laws of physics are simply the consistent rules of that dream. To understand how such a seemingly fantastical idea could be taken seriously, we can turn to the provocative work of a modern cognitive scientist, Donald Hoffman. Hoffman approaches this ancient philosophical question not with mystical intuition, but with the sharp tools of evolutionary biology and game theory. He starts with a simple, powerful question: what is the evolutionary purpose of our perceptions? For generations, we've assumed that our senses evolved to give us an accurate picture of objective reality. We see a tiger as a striped, massive object because that representation helps us avoid being eaten. It seems logical that natural selection would favor perceptions that truthfully depict the world as it is. Hoffman challenges this assumption head-on. He argues that evolution does not care about truth. It cares only about fitness, about survival and reproduction. To illustrate this, Hoffman uses a brilliant analogy. Imagine a computer desktop interface. You see icons like a blue folder and a trash can. You can drag the folder to the trash can to delete a file. This interface is incredibly useful. It allows you to perform complex tasks with ease. But does the icon of a blue folder truthfully represent what is actually happening inside the computer? Not at all. The reality is a frenzy of electrons dancing through silicon, governed by the abstract laws of quantum mechanics and logic gates. The folder icon is a complete fiction, but it's a fiction that is perfectly tailored to your needs as a user. It hides the overwhelming, incomprehensible complexity of the real processes and gives you a simple, symbolic representation that allows you to navigate the system effectively and efficiently. Hoffman proposes that our perceptual systems are exactly like that computer desktop. Space, time, and physical objects are not the truth of reality. They are our species-specific user interface. We see a solid, three-dimensional world not because that's what's really there, but because that particular interface has been evolutionarily advantageous for a medium-sized primate navigating a certain niche on Earth. It allows us to throw a spear, build a shelter, and recognize a predator. But just as the folder icon bears no resemblance to the flow of electrons, the apple you see and touch bears no necessary resemblance to whatever fundamental reality is actually like. This conscious realism, as Hoffman calls it, suggests that the true nature of reality is a vast network of interacting conscious agents, far more complex and alien than our perceptions of space and time can capture. What we call a photon or an electron might not be a tiny particle at all, but a kind of elementary conscious experience. The physical world is a data structure that our consciousness constructs and navigates, a virtual reality headset that evolution has strapped to our heads to guide our behavior, not to reveal the ultimate truth. This idea finds a startling resonance with some interpretations of quantum mechanics itself. The wave function, that mathematical entity that describes all possibilities, is not a physical object existing in space and time. It is an abstract object that lives in a high-dimensional configuration space. When we ask, "Where is the wave function?" we are asking the wrong question, because space itself may be part of the user interface. The collapse of the wave function, then, might not be a physical event at all, but a shift in the state of a conscious agent, a decision or an observation within the fundamental network of mind. The famous paradoxes, like a particle being in two places at once, become easier to swallow if those places are not fundamentally real, but are merely features of our perceptual interface. The particle isn't in two places in an objective space. Our interface is simply representing a more complex, non-spatial reality in a way that our brains can process, and that representation sometimes involves contradictory symbols. Of course, this consciousness-only view raises its own profound challenges. The most obvious one is the problem of shared reality. If the world is a construct of my individual consciousness, why is it so consistent? Why can we all agree on the location of a building or the outcome of a football game? Hoffman's framework addresses this by suggesting that while our individual user interfaces are private, we are all interacting with the same underlying network of conscious agents. Our interfaces are tuned to a shared data stream, much like multiple players logged into the same online game world. Each player has their own private viewpoint, but the rules of the game and the shared environment provide a consistent experience for all. The laws of physics, in this view, are the invariant rules of the game that ensure our individual perceptions remain synchronized. Venturing into this territory forces us to confront the ultimate limits of scientific inquiry. Science, as we practice it, is based on the assumption of an objective, observer-independent world that we can measure and model. But if Hoffman and the idealists are correct, then science has been studying the interface all along, not the underlying reality. We are like master cartographers meticulously mapping every detail of the user interface on our computer screens, believing we are discovering the true geography of the machine's hardware. This doesn't make science useless. The map is incredibly powerful for navigating the interface, but it suggests that there may be a deeper reality, a reality of pure consciousness and its interactions, that our current scientific methods, bound as they are to measurements in space and time, may be fundamentally unequipped to probe. This perspective doesn't provide easy answers, but it opens a door to a universe that is far more mysterious, more mental, and more deeply wondrous than the comforting solidity of our everyday world would ever suggest. Now, let's take a step back and consider a perspective that stands in stark opposition to the idea of a universe molded by mind. For many working at the forefront of neuroscience and philosophy, the notion that consciousness collapses the wave function isn't just speculative. It represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what consciousness is and where it comes from. This mainstream materialist view argues that we are making a classic category error, assigning a property to something that simply doesn't possess it. In this framework, consciousness is not a primary force of nature. It is an exquisite illusion, a beautiful and intricate shadow cast by the complex machinery of the brain. This position is rooted in the undeniable progress of neuroscience. We have mapped the brain with incredible detail, correlating specific subjective experiences with precise physical events. The feeling of joy, the memory of a face, the sharpness of pain, each of these can be linked to patterns of neural firing, the release of neurotransmitters, and the activation of distinct neural networks. When you decide to move your hand, the conscious experience of that decision is preceded by a measurable readiness potential in the brain. From this vantage point, the chain of causality is clear and flows in one direction, from the physical to the mental. Billions of neurons communicating through electrochemical signals give rise to the phenomenon we call consciousness. It is an emergent property, much like the wetness of water emerges from the interactions of countless H2O molecules, or the flow of traffic emerges from the individual decisions of many drivers. Wetness isn't a property of a single molecule. It appears only at a certain level of complexity. Similarly, consciousness is what the brain does when it reaches a certain threshold of intricate, integrated information processing. This materialist perspective sees consciousness as what philosophers call an epiphenomenon, a byproduct that has no causal power of its own. Think of the smoke rising from a locomotive engine. The smoke is a reliable sign that the engine is running, but it doesn't power the train. It's a side effect. In the same way, according to this view, your subjective experience of choosing to raise your hand is a fascinating byproduct of the neural computations that actually caused your hand to move. The feeling itself doesn't do the work, it simply accompanies it. This is a humbling, even deflating idea for many, as it seems to relegate our rich inner lives to the status of a passive shadow. But for its proponents, it is the only position consistent with a scientific worldview that has successfully explained every other phenomenon in terms of physical cause and effect. Attributing the power to collapse quantum wave functions to this epiphenomenal consciousness is, from this skeptical viewpoint, not just a leap of faith but a retreat into a modern kind of magic. It's an attempt to solve one mystery, the measurement problem, by invoking another, even deeper mystery. Critics argue that this is precisely the kind of reasoning that science has moved beyond. We no longer explain the movement of the planets by attributing them to angels pushing them along their courses. We use the well-understood laws of gravity. In the same way, they contend we should seek a physical solution to the quantum measurement problem, like the process of decoherence, rather than inserting a spiritual-sounding entity that we cannot define, measure, or test. The burden of proof, they insist, lies squarely on those who claim that an immaterial mind can influence the physical world, a claim that violates the principle of the causal closure of the physical world, the idea that every physical event has a fully physical cause. This skepticism is not born of a lack of imagination, but from a commitment to methodological naturalism, the rule that scientific explanations should only invoke natural causes and entities. To do otherwise, they warn, is to open the door to an infinite regress of explanations that explain nothing. If consciousness can affect the brain, then what is the mechanism? How does something non-physical interact with neurons? This interaction problem has haunted dualist philosophies for centuries, and materialists see it as a fatal flaw. For them, the most parsimonious explanation, the one that requires the fewest unsupported assumptions, is that the brain is a classical, if immensely complex, computer, and that consciousness is its stunningly sophisticated software running on the wetware of neural tissue. While the hard problem of why there is any subjective experience at all remains a profound puzzle, they believe the answer will eventually be found through a deeper understanding of the brain's biology and information processing, not by granting consciousness a cosmic role it was never meant to play. So where does this leave us? On one side, we have the bold suggestion that human consciousness alone holds the power to shape reality, a view that many find uncomfortably close to mysticism. On the other, we have the starkly physical multiverse, a vision of cosmic scale that can feel alienating and ontologically extravagant. But what if there is a third path, a middle ground that avoids the extremes while still acknowledging the deep connection between mind and matter hinted at by the quantum mystery? This is precisely the promise of an ancient idea that is experiencing a remarkable resurgence in modern philosophy and science: panpsychism. The word itself comes from the Greek pan, meaning all, and psyche, meaning soul or mind. At its core, panpsychism proposes that consciousness is not a rare and miraculous emergence from complex brains, but a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of the universe. In the same way that mass, charge, and spin are considered fundamental properties of matter, panpsychism suggests that some form of consciousness, or at least the potential for experience, is also a basic building block of reality. This doesn't mean that an electron is pondering philosophy or feeling sadness. Rather, it posits that the electron possesses an incredibly simple, rudimentary form of subjective experience, what philosophers call proto-consciousness. This could be as basic as a faint, raw feeling of existence, a single point of perspective, utterly devoid of the complex thoughts and emotions that characterize our own rich inner lives. This perspective offers an elegant way to reframe the quantum measurement problem. If consciousness is indeed fundamental to all matter, then the collapse of the wave function is no longer a magical event triggered by a special human observer. Instead, it becomes a natural physical process involving interactions between entities that all possess some degree of proto-consciousness. When an electron interacts with a measuring device, it's not a classical object acting upon a quantum one. It's two systems, both with their own fundamental conscious properties, coming into relationship. The collapse could be seen as a kind of communication or integration between these simple forms of awareness, leading to a definite outcome. In this view, the human scientist observing the result is simply the final link in a long chain of conscious interactions, not the sole cause of the collapse. The problem of the special observer simply vanishes because every component in the experiment, from the particle to the detector, is already an observer in its own right to a vastly varying degree. This idea finds a surprising ally in one of the most influential philosophers of mind in recent decades, David Chalmers, who famously articulated the hard problem of consciousness. Chalmers argues that panpsychism, while counterintuitive, may actually be the most coherent solution to the problem of how consciousness fits into the natural world. The traditional materialist view, which claims consciousness emerges solely from complex computation, struggles to explain how subjective experience could possibly arise from objective, non-experiencing parts. This is known as the combination problem. How do you get a conscious experience from stacking together billions of non-conscious neurons? It seems like trying to build a colorful sunset out of transparent glass beads. Panpsychism cleverly sidesteps this problem. If consciousness is already fundamental, then the challenge is not to create it from nothing, but to understand how simple, microscopic bits of proto-consciousness combine and organize to form the complex, unified consciousness we experience. This is still a formidable puzzle, but it's a different kind of puzzle, one about combination and complexity, not magical emergence from non-existence. Imagine the universe not as a vast, empty space dotted with rare islands of consciousness, but as a vibrant, conscious field at its very foundation. Think of reality as a great cosmic ocean. From our human perspective, we are like mighty waves, complex, powerful, and self-aware. But the wave is not separate from the ocean. It is entirely made of the same water that constitutes the entire sea. In the same way, according to panpsychism, our rich consciousness is not something alien to the universe. It is a complex, organized pattern arising from the fundamental conscious nature of the particles that make us up. An electron's proto-consciousness might be like a single water molecule, possessing the essential property of wetness but in an incredibly simple form. A human brain, with its trillions of atoms and neurons, orchestrates these fundamental units into a symphony of experience. This view reconciles the seemingly separate realms of physics and consciousness, suggesting they were never truly separate to begin with. It paints a picture of a universe that is not dead, inert matter waiting for a ghost to animate it, but a universe that is inherently alive, awake, and experiential at every level of its existence, offering a profound and holistic vision that has captivated thinkers from ancient times to the cutting edge of modern science. So after this incredible journey through quantum mechanics, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself, where does this leave us? We've navigated a landscape of ideas so radical they defy common sense, and it's now clear that there is no single settled answer. Instead, we are left with a spectrum of interpretations, each with its own compelling strengths and profound weaknesses, forcing us to make a choice about which flavor of cosmic strangeness we find most palatable. On one end of this spectrum, we have the elegant but philosophically heavy proposition of the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation. Its great appeal is its logical consistency. By following the math of quantum mechanics to its ultimate conclusion, it places consciousness on a pedestal as the fundamental agency that crystallizes reality from a haze of possibilities. This view resonates with a deep, intuitive sense that our awareness is not just a passive bystander but an active participant in the universe. It solves the measurement problem with a clear, if mysterious, final trigger. Yet its weaknesses are significant. It remains stubbornly untestable with our current scientific methods, as consciousness itself is a black box we cannot peer into. It also revives the ghost of dualism, asking us to accept that an immaterial mind can somehow influence the physical world, a concept that feels like a step back from centuries of materialist scientific progress. At the opposite pole lies the breathtaking vision of the many worlds interpretation. Its power is in its mathematical purity. It does away with the vague notion of wave function collapse entirely, allowing the elegant equations of quantum mechanics to run their course unimpeded. In doing so, it removes any need for a special conscious observer, treating the entire cosmos as a single, vast quantum system. The cost, however, is an ontological extravagance that is almost unimaginable. It demands we accept the real, physical existence of an infinite and ever-branching multiverse, where every possible outcome of every quantum event is realized in some parallel reality. While this dissolves paradoxes like Wigner's friend, it does so by making our individual lives and choices just one variation in an infinite ensemble which can feel deeply alienating. It also struggles to explain the probabilities we actually observe in our single experienced timeline. Then we have the mainstream view informed by the powerful process of decoherence. This is the pragmatic physicist's answer, and it has largely shifted the debate. Decoherence provides a clear, physical mechanism for why the quantum weirdness seems to vanish at larger scales. It shows how constant interaction with the environment inevitably destroys superposition, explaining why baseballs and planets behave classically without needing to invoke consciousness. For most working scientists, this settles the issue. The universe gets along just fine without us watching it. However, a crucial subtlety remains. Decoherence explains how superposition is lost, how different possibilities become effectively invisible to each other, but it does not, by itself, explain why only one definite outcome is experienced. The universe described by decoherence is still a vast tapestry of coexisting possibilities. It just appears classical from within any single decohered branch. This leaves the deepest metaphysical question: why this specific reality, still lingering in the air. Therefore, the question of whether consciousness collapses the universe remains one of the greatest open mysteries in all of science. It sits at the turbulent intersection of physics, philosophy, and neuroscience, a puzzle that has resisted a final solution for nearly a century. The choice between these interpretations is not yet a matter of empirical evidence, but of philosophical preference. Do you find it more reasonable to place consciousness at the center of the cosmic story, or to accept the existence of countless unseen worlds? This is not a failure of science, but a testament to its depth. It reveals a universe far stranger and more wonderful than we could have imagined, and it challenges us to expand our understanding of what it means to be, to know, and to observe. The conversation is far from over. It is an active, evolving frontier, inviting each new generation to contribute their perspective to this most profound of dialogues. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, a voyage that began with a single electron passing through two slits and has led us to the very edge of what it means to exist. We've ventured from the baffling behavior of quantum particles to the philosophical battlegrounds of Copenhagen, from the cosmic solitude of von Neumann's consciousness to the infinite branching pathways of Everett's multiverse. We've seen how the simple act of asking what is real unravels into a tapestry of possibilities, each interpretation a different lens through which to view the cosmos. This is the unfinished revolution of quantum mechanics, not a settled doctrine, but a living, breathing inquiry that continues to challenge the most brilliant minds on the planet. What this exploration reveals more than any single answer is that the question itself, does consciousness collapse the universe, is a doorway. It forces us to confront the deepest possible inquiries about our place in the grand scheme of things. Are we insignificant accidents in a vast, mindless machine, temporary flickers of awareness in a cosmos that would grind on identically without us? Or are we participants intimately woven into the fabric of reality, with our observation serving as the final stitch that brings the tapestry into a definite pattern? This isn't just a technical debate for physicists, it's a question about meaning, purpose, and the nature of existence itself. The quantum mystery holds up a mirror, and what we see reflected back is a choice about what kind of universe we believe we inhabit. Now, this conversation doesn't end with this video. In many ways, it's just beginning, and that's where you come in. We've navigated the arguments from decoherence to panpsychism, from the cold equations of the lab to the warm intuitions of philosophy. But I am genuinely curious to know where you, after hearing all of this, find yourself leaning. Does the mainstream view that the environment itself resolves quantum ambiguity through decoherence feel like the most sensible and scientific conclusion? Or does the idea that our awareness plays a fundamental role in shaping reality resonate with you on a deeper level, suggesting a universe that is not just known but completed by the act of knowing? Perhaps you're drawn to the staggering possibility of parallel worlds, finding solace or wonder in the idea that every possibility is realized somewhere. There are no easy answers here, only profound choices, so I want to extend the discussion to you. What do you think? Is the universe a steadfast, mind-independent reality, patiently obeying its own laws whether we are here to witness them or not? Or is it a collaborative project, a co-creation between the cosmos and the conscious beings that have emerged within it, with our observation being an essential part of bringing the universe into full being? Share your perspective, your questions, and your own favorite interpretation in the comments below. Let's continue to explore this magnificent